If you know the 4 types of interviewer and what appeals to them the most, you can pretty much win any job you want. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to quickly spot which type of interviewer you're dealing with and how to frame your answers so that you really connect with them and position yourself for 6-figure roles consistently. Okay, so when I talk about the 4 types of interviewer, I don't mean personality types or job titles. I'm talking about something deeper, how different people decide whether to hire you and what they're afraid of getting wrong with the hire. Because we know from psychology that people work harder to avoid losing something than they do to gain something new. And in hiring, it's exactly the same. Every interviewer is managing risk, but each one is just managing a different type of risk. And that's why the same candidate can feel like a great fit in one interview and completely miss the mark in another. And now Thomas Erickson explains this very well in Surrounded by Idiots, and it's that people frustrate each other because they speak different communication languages and don't even realize it. And in interviews, those different languages show up as 4 very specific types of interviewer. First, you have the red interviewer, the decider. They're direct, outcome-focused, and fast-moving. They care far less about process and far more about whether you can deliver results without slowing things down. And you'll often see reds in roles like CEO, founder, general manager, or other commercial leadership positions. In interviews, they're listening for clarity, confidence, and decisive thinking. And if you can show that you make good calls under pressure and move things forward, you'll earn their respect quickly. And then you have the yellow interviewer, the sponsor. They're energy driven, they're optimistic, and they're big picture focused. They care about momentum, belief, and whether someone will raise the level in the room. And in interviewers, they're listening for passion, ideas, and whether you can get others excited to work with you. And they respond more to stories than data, and enthusiasm more than structure. And this style often shows up in visionary leaders, product or growth roles, and definitely senior marketing positions. Next is the green interviewer, the gatekeeper. They're calm, steady, and relationship focused. They care about things like stability, trust, and how well a hire will affect the team long term. In interviews, they're listening for reliability, humility, and how you handle people, not just the tasks. They want to know that bringing you in won't create friction or disruption. You'll commonly see this style in HR or operations and people leadership positions. And finally, you have the blue interviewer, the validator. They're analytical, detail-orientated, and very risk-aware. They care about logic, accuracy, and whether a hiring decision can be defended if it's questioned later. In interviews, they are listening for clear reasoning, evidence, and structured thinking. And they're skeptical of vague claims and emotional appeals that don't have proof behind them. And this style is very common in finance, engineering, legal, compliance, and technical leadership positions. The mistake most execs make is speaking the same way to all 4 types and wondering why their interviews feel unpredictable. Okay, so how do you actually spot which types of interviewer you're dealing with? Now, you don't need a personality test and you don't need to guess. Most of the time, you can work it out in the first few minutes just by listening to how they ask their questions. Because a red interviewer pushes for decisions. They'll interrupt, they'll challenge you, or they'll ask questions like, what would you do? Or what's your recommendation? Because they're testing speed and judgment. Whereas a yellow interviewer, they will zoom out. They'll talk about vision, direction, and where the business is actually heading. They'll ask things like, where do you see this going? Or how would you approach this differently? Because they're listening for energy and belief. Whereas a green interviewer slows things down because they ask about collaboration, conflict, and how you work with others. Questions like, how do you handle disagreements? Or how do you work with different personalities? Because they're listening for safety and trust. And finally, a blue interviewer. They're going to go deep. They're going to ask for detail, evidence, and edge cases. Questions like, how did you measure that? Or what assumptions did you make? Because they're listening for logic and defensibility. Because once you start to hear which questions they're asking, the type becomes obvious. And this is where I see most execs go wrong. They hear the questions, but instead of adjusting their answer, they default to how they communicate. And they answer the exact same way no matter who's sitting across the table from them. And they try to be detail-orientated and decisive and inspiring and collaborative, all in the same answer. And all that does is just blur the signal. Nothing lands clearly because then the interviewer doesn't think, that was bad. They just think, I'm not sure. And in hiring, that uncertainty kills offers. And here's the frustrating part. This usually happens to the most capable candidate. Because when you're good at your job, you want to show range. You want to cover all the bases and you want to be thorough. But interviews don't reward completeness. They reward clarity. And when you speak to everyone at once, no one hears you clearly. Your best strengths get diluted, your judgment gets lost, and the interviewer fills in the gaps themselves. And that's how people walk out of interviews thinking, well, I answered that well, but I still didn't get the offer. Now, the fix is not to say more, but it's to choose which signal to lead with. And once you do that, interviews stop feeling unpredictable. Okay, so I want you to imagine you're asked one of the most common questions you'll ever hear in a senior level interview. Tell me about a time you handled a difficult situation. Now, most execs will answer this once and just hope it lands. They'll talk about the problem, they'll talk about what they did, and they'll talk about the result. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable and it's okay. But here's the problem. Each interviewer is actually listening for something different inside that answer. So I'm going to take one situation, the same experience, and show you how it should be framed depending on who's sitting in front of you. And you'll notice nothing about the truth changes, only the emphasis. Okay, so if you're speaking to a red, the decider, when the interviewer is a red, they're listening for judgment and momentum. So you need to lead with the decision. And you say something like this: the situation was messy and there wasn't a perfect option. So I made a call, I aligned the team, and I removed the blockers. The outcome was X, I delivered it in Y timeframe. Now this works because Reds care about speed, clarity, and outcomes. They're not asking themselves whether you're thoughtful. They're asking whether you can move things forward under pressure. Okay, so next, you're speaking to a yellow, the sponsor. Same situation, but here's the different framing. You say something like this: the team had lost momentum, so I reframed the problem. I brought people together and got the buy-in around a clear direction. And once belief came back, execution followed. Now this lands because yellows care about energy, influence, and vision. They're listening for whether you can lift the room, not whether you could just follow a process. Okay, so now you're speaking to a green, the gatekeeper. You need to lead with trust and stability. So something like this: there were strong options on both sides. So I focused on listening first, creating alignment, and making sure people felt heard. Because once the team trusted the direction, the solution stuck. And this works because greens care about safety and long-term harmony. They're asking themselves whether bringing you in will create calm or friction. And finally, if you're speaking to a blue, the validator, you need to lead with logic and evidence. So something like this works. We broke the problem down, tested a few options, and chose the lowest risk solution based on the data. We measured the impact and adjusted as needed. And this lands because blues care about defensibility and accuracy. They're thinking, if this decision is challenged later, does it hold up? So here's the important part to take away. Nothing about the situation changed. Nothing about your capability changed. What changed was the signal that you led with, because strong candidates don't invent different stories. They decide which part of the truth matters most to the person listening. And once you understand this, interviews stop feeling random. You stop hoping your answers land and you start aiming for them. Same experience, same truth, different emphasis. And that's how you move from being a strong candidate to the obvious hire. Now, at this point, some people might start to wonder whether this sounds manipulative. It's not. It's not changing who you are. You're not making things up. You're not pretending to be someone else. You're just choosing which part of the truth to lead with. So here's the rule to remember. You don't need to speak to all four colors. You just need to lead with one, and the rest can follow naturally if they ask. Because in real interviews, this is subtle. If you're speaking to a red, you lead with the decision and the result. If you're speaking to a yellow, you lead with the idea and momentum. If you're speaking to a green, you lead with the people and the stability. And if you're speaking to a blue, you lead with the logic and the evidence. Same answer, same experience, just a different starting point. And when you do this correctly, it doesn't feel scripted. It feels like you're finally being understood. because then you're speaking in a way the other person trusts. And that's why getting hired stops feeling like the roll of a dice. And once you understand who you're talking to and what they need to feel safe saying yes to, interviews become predictable. And that's the real advantage. Because at senior levels, that ability to adjust how you communicate isn't optional. It's expected. Because here's the reality. Even if you lead with the right signal, you can still lose the offer. Not because you're weak, not because you're underqualified, and not because but because you sound risky. And hiring managers don't hire when there's risk attached. So in this next video, I'm going to show you why interviews are actually very easy once you understand what they're really trying to avoid. Click here and I'll break it down for you.